Paulo. I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
There is so much to be learned from the history of Technicolor that I would not be surprised if several generations of scholars will find an endless source of inspiration and discovery in the papers that have been donated to the museum. So yes, the Centennial of Technicolor is a point of departure for further intellectual adventures. My name is Paolo Kerki Uzai. I'm the Senior Curator of the Moving Image Department at George Eastman House.
I'm Bruce Barnes, and I'm the Ron and Donna Fielding Director of George Eastman House.
Hi, my name is Jared Case. I'm the Head of Collection Information, Research, and Access for the Moving Image Department.
George Eastman House holds one of the 5 largest collections of moving images in the United States. It is also one of the largest collections of silent films and early films worldwide.
The founding curator was a passionate film preservationist named James Card, who had his own collection but also was very well connected and very dogged in his pursuit of film prints at a time when most people weren't paying any attention to film preservation. So that allowed us to amass a great collection with particular strengths in early cinema.
We have a collection of over 28,000 films that cover the entire history of international cinema, from the Lumiere brothers to digital-born works.
I would say highlights include our collection of Technicolor negatives in particular, as well as Technicolor projection prints. We think we have the leading collection in the world of Technicolor negatives. We have an extraordinary collection of early silent films and of silent films generally, and of films from the golden age of cinema. We have the original Technicolor negatives of both Gone with the Wind and of The Wizard of Oz. No one could really recreate our collection at this point, starting from scratch.
I'd say that the most remarkable discovery we made in the course of the preparation for the Technicolor project was actually the realization of how many early Technicolor films have been lost. And because the beginnings of Technicolor largely cover the silent period, it's not surprising to realize that at least 2/3, if not more, of the films made by Technicolor or with the Technicolor system in the early years of cinema is no longer extant, which makes the films we have saved, the surviving films, all the more precious. In addition to these films, we do have notebooks pertaining to the research held by technicians and scientists of the Technicolor company in the early days of the organization. And of course, in 2010 came the massive collection of Technicolor papers and equipment donated by the Technicolor company to George Eastman House. By and large, the audience does not know that Technicolor started in 1915 and that for more than 20 years, Technicolor painstakingly tried to achieve the natural color that eventually resulted in the amazing colors of Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz. We received several thousand bottles of color dyes that were used by Technicolor researchers and scientists in the early days of the company.
The bottles of dye was an interesting part of the collection that came from Dr. Goldberg, in that it wasn't something that we were necessarily expecting, but as it became apparent that that was part of the collection, it was something we very much valued in terms of acquiring it. It shows not only the process that they went through, the many different dyes that they tested throughout the years, but also showed progress of how the dyes got better, more useful toward what they were trying to do with the Technicolor process.
There was an amazing array of dyes of different kinds, made with different materials that were used in the process of researching the ideal color balance.
As part of the Goldberg Collection, not only are there papers, but there are also strips, film strips, that were developed as tests, and they're stapled oftentimes, just included with the folders corresponding to the tests that were being done by Goldberg and the Technicolor company. So these were tests with various dyes, with various processes, combinations of the dyes, to see what would work best in terms of getting that natural color.
And we have to point out that only a small minority of the dyes represented in this collection was actually used for the Technicolor process. And this is because before deciding which color dyes had to be used, the technicians of Technicolor had to undertake extensive research about other possibilities, other color dyes.
The mathematics and the chemistry is what created the aesthetic effect that they were trying to achieve. So they had an idea in their head of the aesthetic, but they needed to work behind the scenes with the chemistry and with the mathematics in order to figure out how to create that.
It is not quite possible to exactly reproduce the colors, the original colors of Technicolor. And this is because the Technicolor system requires a certain kind of equipment, a certain kind of processing that's no longer active. Modern technology, both photochemical and digital technology, enables us to achieve a color that is virtually identical to the look and feel of the Technicolor system. If a print was faded, there was not much we could do to bring back the original colors. Digital technology enables us to give back to a contemporary audience a color that's much more similar to the color that was actually seen by audiences in the 1920s and 1930s. On the other hand, we know that digital is not the ideal tool for the conservation of moving images originally made on film. So when it comes to conservation, the preservation of the artifacts, there's still nothing better than film, which is why we are proud to preserve our Technicolor collection and all our cinematic collection in climatized vault with prints, actual prints. When we felt ready to exhibit our restored films, we decided to collaborate with 3 major institutions.
One that was at the Berlin Film Festival in January, one that was at the Austrian Film Museum, which is one of the world's most important film archives, and one that's currently going on at the Museum of Modern Art. So all of those were essentially curated by us in collaboration with curators at those institutions.
We wanted to showcase the best of Technicolor with the best possible print and show them in the best museums dedicated to the art of preserving, collecting, and exhibiting the history of cinema.
Paolo Kerchiusai, who had been working for many, many years as the head of the moving image department, very much wanted to be able to do a publication for the centenary of Technicolor, raised that to me as a possibility. And I said that I thought we should do it, and I thought we should, do it no holds barred.
The Dawn of Technicolor is a book dedicated to the first 20 years of the Technicolor company. Really, there is no other book dedicated exclusively to the origins of Technicolor. We were all looking forward to a sort of Bible about the first 20 years of Technicolor, and this book now exists. There is fairly extensive literature about the history of Technicolor from the classical Hollywood era. But there is very little, if anything, published about the development of the Technicolor system between 1915 and 1935. And that's the reason why the book, The Dawn of Technicolor, can be considered as an essential reference guide to the first 20 years of the Technicolor company.
You have to view the book as the beginning of the process rather than the end of the process. And that what it will do is it will lead people to discoveries, to new discoveries.
To use the word of Robert Gottlieb, the president of the Louis B. Mayer Foundation and a major supporter of George Eastman House, this is, in his words, a scholarly work disguised as a coffee table book.
The influence of Technicolor, I don't think, can be overstated. It was the way through dye and imbibition that people saw the world around them. There were representations of it in black and white prior to that. There were attempts with color in terms of trying to create a mood with tinting or toning, but it wasn't until the 3-color strip process that we got to see the world around us, the way that we saw it through our own eyes.
What I found most intriguing in certain ways was the incredible entrepreneurship of the founders of Technicolor. They were hugely innovative and inventive, hugely determined, and very sophisticated scientifically, but they also kept running into these commercial roadblocks of one kind or another that related to some extent to technical issues, but also just acceptance among the studios of whether or not color was really something that was needed or how should color be used. And they were tremendously inventive in finding ways to overcome the objections or the limitations that they were facing with the studios.
I think it is important to look at the centennial of Technicolor, at the book, The Dawn of Technicolor, and at the Technicolor project in general, not as a point of arrival, but as a point of departure. This is a beginning of a much longer story. It's a little bit like the research that has been done after the men went to the moon and pieces of rocks were brought down to Earth. We knew it would take decades in order to understand what this material is about. And the same applies to Technicolor. I think that the effects, the scholarly and cultural effects of the research about the origins of Technicolor are going to reverberate over several decades. There is so much to be learned from the history of Technicolor that I would not be surprised if several generations of scholars will find an endless source of inspiration and discovery in the papers that have been donated to the museum. So yes, the centennial of Technicolor is a point of departure for further intellectual adventures.